the 18th day of Black History Month. I hope you're doing well. I know I'm a little late today. I was busy. As you can see, I'm all spiffy in my gear. Had some meetings to take and things to do. But today's topic is going to focus on culture is shaped by leadership. This is something that we already know. But for some reason, it comes when we're in the workspace as though we are the ones that are building the culture versus leadership building the culture. I mean, that's the whole point of why we went through the founding of the country and the way it went, as far as slavery and things like that, and continued oppression and suppression, is because of the culture that was instilled within this land through the leaders that were in charge and the leaders that we continue to put in place that mimic those same behaviors. They are the ones that are determining, what should be avoided, what is accepted, what is not accepted, who's not accepted, different policies and things that align with that. All of that comes from leadership. Leadership is the face of why we live in the world that we live today. And it's up to us to determine, what leaders we are going to look to move us forward from that. And that first starts with understanding, as I spoke about yesterday, understanding, what makes a great leader. And that means someone that is really able to be an individual and not, mimicking behaviors of the past or falling in line with the culture of the past, but someone that's able to create a new culture, to build new ideas and bring about new processes and ways of thinking so that we are moved forward into society, into more of an inclusive space, a space that is welcoming of all and non-judgmental, and a safe space and a healthy space for all. And that starts with understanding that culture is not an accident. It's a leadership outcome. It's all, look at me touching my eye. Y'all know I don't be wearing a whole lot of makeup. Today I put on the mascara and my eyes just watering, everything is just too much. But it is what it is. But follow with me. Culture is not an accident. It's a leadership outcome. And it is a representation of what is deemed as acceptable. And when we are able to accept that the culture that we are trying to move forward from is not the culture that is deemed as acceptable, only then will true change come about. And that goes with, as I've mentioned from yesterday's talk, not focusing on mimicking behaviors of the past, moving forward in a way that is looking to new leaders that are able to bring new ideas, coming from an understanding of all and not just a few. And that focuses on, not being afraid to also, as a leader, speak up and bring your ideas forward and help to steer a new understanding of culture and shaping culture and the understanding of where there are limitations and disadvantages and ways of improvement. That's the only way to move forward and learn from the past. And that's all about recognizing what needs to be learned, what needs to be understood, how we can go about, understanding how we can bring others to the table as well. So as we move forward, it's not just us standing up and speaking, but we're bringing other people with us to create a society that is inclusive for all, welcoming of all, and bringing opportunities to all. It's not just about the understanding of where we are in society is what it should be and how, things need to be, and the unnecessary idea of thinking that no change is necessary. That is ridiculous to believe that. If we were to believe that change was not necessary, we wouldn't evolve. We would stay the same. I mean, even the day that we're living would be continuous and never ending and never changing. Hence why we need to continuously evolve and look at ways of improving every day. Every day that we go about living, we are learning something new in every aspect of our life, not just within our families and stuff like that, but of course also within the workplace and in society as a whole. And it's up to us to understand how we are going to learn from the thing, or use the things that we've learned to make a better world and teach others based on the information that we have learned. And the first thing that starts with is recognizing how are we going to work towards shaping a culture that is represented by the future that we need and deserve. Not taking a performative ideology where we're saying one thing but not actually enacting it and living by it. We have a habit of doing that in society, and a lot of individuals that are our leaders that we put into leadership positions, they do performative acts of explaining how they're all about inclusivity and the understanding of inclusivity, but still align with those that are not. And that is one thing where we forget to hold individuals accountable. Accountability is something that we are not really helping others to, live by. Hi, thank you for joining me. Not ensuring that others live by. And I think that is why so many people become so stressed and just kind of robotic with the understanding of how we move through life, right? Because it's the feeling as though no one will be held accountable. That accountability is just fictitious, right? That there's always a loophole and people can get out of it. And that's something where we as a society need to stop that as well. I'll speak more on that. I think I'll make that the next topic. But for today, culture is shaped by leadership. Definitely is one in showing, when we speak of culture, it's not just, the beliefs that we have, but it's who's within that culture, right? Who's around us, who we surround ourselves by, you know, the type of foods that we eat, everything that goes along with it, that makes us who we are, the acceptance of all of these different things into our space. And that is what is shaped based on our leadership and us upholding and assigning people who we deem to lead us. That's the understanding of humans, that we always look to that one person to lead us. Not all, but when we look at groups, ideally, based on scientifically, that's how we humans move and feel as though we need to evolve through life and through, into the future. So with that, we need to make sure that those that we are putting in place are actually a representation of us. And that's one thing where it can get really tricky, because it's so easy to claim that you believe something or that you align with a certain ideology, but soon as you gain power, you shift that ideology. And then that's where it gets tricky, because not many want to lead, right? We all know that people want a leader, but not many want to step up and take that action, whether it's in the workplace or, just in society as a whole. And that's something where even if we don't want to stand up and be a leader, we still, as leaders ourselves, have to know how to voice and create a culture and shape the culture so that those that do lead us are able to lead us properly and, more in a fair, inclusive, and safe and more morale way. It's not just about you're taking control and then you're not really leading. Leading is about giving direction, delegating, aligning people with how we're shaping and moving about in the world. And us as leaders of ourselves, but followers of those that we put into power, it's up to us to make sure that when the ship is misaligned and the direction of where we're being led isn't aligned with how we are truly believing, it's up to us to then take our power back, whether that's through, voting in someone new, or if those that are, doing things that are illegal or whatever, unethical, that we're holding them accountable by removing them, by, by taking away, their pay or whatever, however, some, and then even changing policies if we're not even able to hold them accountable how we want to. When we look at different aspects of accountability in corporate spaces and government, there's a lot of policies in place. So even though leaders are being held accountable by being removed, there's policies in place where they're still able to be paid handsomely throughout their lives. If it's government, they're getting a check for the rest of their lives. If it's corporate, they're getting a huge lump sum settlement type of payment. So when we look at how we shape culture, we're looking from that aspect as well, because you cannot have leadership and good leadership if you cannot control it. Leaders are not meant to be kings. They're not meant to be out here, waving their magic wand and making decisions because that's what they choose. No, we are instilling people into a certain space for them to direct and delegate and hold on and lead us into the direction that we value, and we shape that every day with how we think and how we move about and how we go about our daily lives. So that is something that we really, really, really need to learn as leaders ourselves. We are leaders as ourselves, how we're ensuring accountability in the spaces that we're in, how we're ensuring that, those that we truly trust and are holding them to, lead us in the direction that we need to be going, how do we continuously do that? That's something that's we have to always make sure to hold ourselves accountable for, speaking up when things need to be said. I get it, we all can't be leaders as in upholding power and being in powerful positions, but at the same time when we see performative actions, or lack of care or even fear-based ideology being pushed on us, what is that? We're not here for that type of thinking. We're here for moving forward into an inclusive space. We're not going back to the past. That's what Black History Month is all about. Us learning from the past, reflecting, moving from that suppressive mindset, moving from the suppressor, suppressing, moving from not holding accountable. And the accountability aspect is where we are stuck. And we are stuck because we are still holding on to that same culture, because we're allowing the same leadership style and leadership skills and best practices to follow us into the future, shaping our current culture, morphing it into this new idea. Even though us were believing in inclusivity, there's still ways where those old ways of thinking still seep in and still shift to push people forward that should not be empowered, that should not be empowered. And if they're going to be empowered, we need to hold them accountable when they take actions that aren't aligned with where we should be in life. And this goes within workspace, society, everything. So when this space, we're not only speaking about just society, but also workspace. So for you to be a CEO in your life, in your career, that means understanding how are you going to shape how leadership is held accountable within your workspace. That is one thing, and that starts with really just the really, as I've said before, we as employees, when we're in these workspaces, that we have two responsibilities: to perform well, and then how are we going to spend our money, right? Because we go to work, we get paid, we go buy things. So it's all on how you're supporting corporations that are upholding individuals and spaces that are not inclusive, that are not safe, and hindering the ability of others. That's the only way that we can shift from that. And understanding that we have the power to shift that culture, and we have that power based on us being willing to want to work within these organizations, us being willing to want to spend our money on these organizations. How we move about as our leaderships and actions, that determines what other individuals are doing. We see what's going on with companies like Target, when you're moving within that way. And that's not just only, from how we're spending our dollars, but if you look on social, you see individuals that actually work in that space or in companies that operate in that way, of these ideas of shifting from DEI or shifting from how they hire to inclusive individuals, or just the wording of how they go about, or even the idea of incidences going on in the workplace and no action is being taken. When we stand up and we move forward by how we work, who we work for, and how we spend our money, those are the greatest ways of shifting culture. And also the understanding of how we communicate with those within our workspace. That also determines how we're shaping culture. So you may have leadership thinking they're shaping culture one way, but us as leaders, we're shaping culture another way. And as we shift that culture, it pushes them to have to align with where we are. I saw one post on social media where it focused on Why do employees feel as though they should be treated equally as leadership, equally as the C-suite, as the executives? And it's not about wanting to be treated equal as executives. It's about wanting to be respected, wanting to be paid fairly, wanting to be treated, you know, as you should be treated, because you, as the employee, as the individuals, are driving business success. Without you, there is no business. Period. The human. Regardless of all the technology and AI that we look to implement, and all this type of stuff, it's still the individual, the lower level worker, those at the bottom. They're driving business success. Yeah, the executive may be viewed as driving business success because they're standing at the helm, but they have no idea what's really going on. They're just looking at numbers. They're just looking at the metrics. And the metrics, remember, numbers don't lie, but they don't really tell a full story. If you're not willing to go deep in, ask the hard questions, and get the hard feedback and criticism, then you never really understand what's truly going on. So that's something that must be understood as well. So that is what determines what makes the employee and the executive equal, but also not deemed on the same level. Employees have that right to ask questions, to demand fair pay, fair wages, and respect and safety within the space because they're driving business success. Executives, yes, you're in charge and you have this C-suite. So yeah, you can get you a handsome wage, but not at the expense of the worker. That is where that needs to be understood within all aspects. And that type of understanding can only be driven through individuals within. This is why it's important that we also have unions. Union is like a dirty word for some reason now, but it really should not be, because that is what's going to level the playing field and allow for the voices to be spoken, especially for individuals that don't want to speak up but have something worthy to say. That is definitely something that is necessary. And it's also imperative for those in the HR space to have an understanding that you're not just working as a partner for the not for the organization, but for the C-suite. You're working solely for the business, but your job is to be a liaison, a voice of mediation between the employer and the C-suite and all that, and employees. Because remember, that's a relationship. And HR's role is to make sure that relationship is understood. For some reason, HR gets misunderstood as just a paper pusher. But no, they're there to maintain this understanding and to create a dialogue to help sway and understand and shape and mold the culture of a business. Leadership, yes, creates the culture, but their culture is created based on what's driving performance, right? It should not be based on what the leader assumes it should be, especially when we look at leadership that's relying on old tactics or looking at how they may come from certain universities and certain things that are upheld, right? And they're supposed to be where the greatest of minds go, but they're still holding on to the same old ideologies that have us stuck. We are still using the same best practices of the days of the past. Business doesn't operate that way. If we're looking to move more towards the future, then we have to understand that culture revolves around human, which is the human approach, the humane approach. That's how culture should be shaped. And if leadership is not leading from that understanding, then it's time for you to stand up and make sure there's a change being made, not only within your society of where you live and the politics areas of where you are, and of course us all when it comes to politics overall for this nation, and also within the company that you work for. You must be the face of that, and you must be the representation that also leads others. It doesn't mean you need to stand up and speak loudly. It can come from different actions. And with that, I hope that this is inspiring somebody, because the whole goal is to ensure that all behaviors are aligned with values. So really, it's all about, what are we valuing? Are we valuing humans and our health, well-being, fair pay, the human approach, the acceptance of all? Or are we just focusing what we think is most worthy? Because nothing is more worth more than the other. to be honest. Nothing is worth more than the other. The human approach is the best approach. The humane approach is the most successful approach. That's what drives profits. That's what drives innovation. That's what drives growth. That's what drives change. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's talk. If you have any suggestions for the next talks for the upcoming days, I'll be glad to hear it. Just put it down in the comments below. Until then, be the change, love yourself and others. Bye.